Well, welcome to City Hall, everybody. There are some seats if anyone wants to come and sit down, but it is a packed room. Apparently, we have maximum capacity. This room can take 130 people, and 130 seats is what we have. So it's great to see so many people here from across the southeast interested in this issue. Representation from 60 public bodies across the region. This is particularly exciting for us today because this is the first time that we've participated in Plantech Week and the first time that we've attempted to pull together planners from across the wider southeast to review some of the great work that's happening in the sector. And today we've got a number of objectives. The first is that we want to raise the profile of the work that's happening in the Plantech sector. And secondly, recognising that many planning authorities don't have the resources these days to deliver projects like these, just working alone and ploughing their own furrows. So we want to start discussions about the real savings and the real opportunities that can be realised by working collectively. So we hope today's event will see the start of more partnerships, for example, between authorities on new ways of working and ideas about new tools to help planners make more effective decisions and obviously, ultimately, greater delivery on the ground. Thirdly, this isn't only about all things new. We've purposely engaged with existing suppliers of back office systems, and they've got a space here as well for them to help support you in where you're, and have a discussion with you about where your business areas go next. So to set some context, I just wanted to say a few words about City Hall's interest in Plantech and PropTech. We here see really great potential in these areas to support the Mayor's ambitions to deliver good growth. Growth that's socially and economically inclusive and environmentally sustainable. And the Mayor's made a number of commitments in relation to good growth that are borne out through some of what you're going to see here today at City Hall. And amongst them, these include increasing, obviously, the delivery of housing, and particularly affordable homes, the genuinely affordable housing that Londoners need, and the new Plantech tools can help us achieve that. Joining up infrastructure planning and delivery to speed up the delivery of housing and space for jobs, jobs themselves, and to reduce congestion and disruption from street works. There's also promoting innovation, supporting innovative tech solutions which will enable Londoners to access and use public services and information more easily and efficiently than they do now. And also putting an open data strategy at the very heart of London government, bringing data from across London's boroughs and public agencies, putting it all together and opening it up to enable quicker decision making, better services, more efficient government, and of course greater transparency. So this afternoon you're going to be seeing demonstrations of projects that are leading the way to improve planning for planners and residents alike. We'll start with some tools that will change how residents engage with planning authorities and then move on to consider work being done on viability and things done at a strategic level that both help the public and private sectors. Following this, there'll also be a demonstration on the map area downstairs of information that the UK Space Agency make available to you free of charge as a public body. There'll also be a VR demonstration and other exhibitors that I think you're going to find useful. Also along with wine, that's useful as well, and which I think needs to thank iDocs as well for kindly supplying that. So please do join us downstairs for that opportunity. So we're really keen for today's event to provide a really safe space for discussion and questions. So although there will be filming going on of the presentations, we're not going to film the Q&A sessions that follow. So please do ask questions and engage in frank and challenging discussion, keep it pleasant though, about the opportunities that are arising in this area and what your hopes are, what your fears are, what your concerns are, what you think the challenges are for implementing this agenda. So we hope that you find the event really useful and really look forward to hearing you today and feedback later. So thank you and enjoy the afternoon.
Now, I should probably start by apologising. Obviously, this room is designed that you're meant to be able to look at any screen look at that screen. My name's Alistair Parvin. I'm the founder of Open Systems Lab. We're a non-profit technology and systems innovation company. And we've been working with a few councils, particularly Southwark, on Plantech. So I'm going to kind of quickly introduce you to that. Out of interest, obviously many of you work in planning. How many of you have actually submitted a planning application in your kind of private lives? So, right, for you people, you don't need to listen to the next bit. You already know what I'm about to say, which is that submitting a planning application is really, 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 really hard. Because basically, even to do a relatively simple planning application, we worked out you need to find at least go through eight different websites and documents at least, and work out which bits apply to you. A lot of it doesn't apply to you, by the way. Planning suffers from the Donald Rumsfeldian problem of unknown unknowns, that you don't know what you don't know, and that's how most people kind of are confronting this information. And our immediate thing is obviously, this is really frustrating for people. So even for relatively small questions like, do I need planning permission to put in an extension or something like that, it's this big unknown. Let's rewind very slightly and say, well, why? What's going on here? Well, if you kind of go back to the beginning of the workflow, it begins with the question of how do we publish policy? How do we publish planning information? And of course, today we know how we do it. We have different bits of government, which include local and regional and national, all publishing their various bits of guidance, legislation, and policy separately, and they kind of all publish those. So as an applicant, you have to kind of get them all onto your desk and sort of pass your way through them and kind of work out which bits are relevant to you. And what's interesting about this is that usually 80% of every document doesn't apply to you, but 10% or 20% of it might. So once you've done that, you then have to kind of prepare or pay professionals to prepare drawings, reports, and so forth. And one of the hilarious things we've sort of found is that actually a huge quantity of those reports is actually your own policies regurgitated back at you. And so sort of to thicken out, because applicants aren't quite sure what it is that planners want to know, which sort of adds to that. And then, of course, they then sort of go in, upload all these documents, send them off, and pray, basically. So then if we flipped down to the other side of that, we were like, oh, this is really frustrating for applicants. But actually, the big lesson sort of early on in our project was, whoa, this is a massive burden on planners as well, on planning authorities as well, because every single one of these things has to be, first has to be validated, which takes around 4 to 5 hours per application on average. Obviously, and we know that roughly about 50% on average of applications are invalid and have to go round again, sometimes as many as 9 times, we understand. Of course, they also have to be, all this has to be done manually, including then manually assessing and passing through those policies to work out, what are the salient issues, etc., who needs to be consulted internally, etc., etc. So that's a whole bunch of hours. This is before you even get to then the failure demand, which is then falling on your inquiries, your email inboxes, etc., etc. So if you kind of top that up, there's a huge amount of resource burden which is falling on planners before you even get to the actual stuff of planning. If you kind of work that out, we reckon it's roughly just a bit north of £1 million per council, per planning authority per year, for the average, imaginary average planning authority. And if you multiply that across all of the planning authorities in England, we're talking at sort of 370 million-ish pounds worth of planning resources being taken up on stuff that isn't planning. So that's interesting. So at the root of this, at the root of what's going on, is essentially the reason is it's nobody's fault. It's because our planning system was designed to run on paper and documents. Okay, we now put those bits of paper on a screen in the form of PDFs and emails, but the essential nature of the interaction hasn't changed. And so absolutely everything has to be written by a human and read by a human. So essentially the big shift that the web allows us to do, and this is why in most of the rest of our lives when it comes to booking a holiday or getting car insurance, it's a lot easier than that. It's because actually we can shift the system from running planning information as documents to planning information as data. And so what that allows us to do is make a much, much simpler place which pulls in everything that's already known, policy, various forms of spatial data in a machine-readable format into a digital planning guide. So very quickly, I'm going to give you a very, very quick demonstration of this, what it would look like. This is Southwark's. So the first thing it always asks is basically, where are you? In various different ways. Essentially, the questions boil down. It's a series of questions that essentially boil down to where are you, what do you want to do, and how much of it do you want to do. But straight away, obviously, we can pull in all that available GIS data. So, is it in a conservation area? Does it fall under Article 4 directions, etc., etc. And then it's not a chatbot. People are just answering a series of questions. And what's really, really helpful about this is that even within a few questions, we can, just using a triage system, we can immediately eliminate 80 and 90% of all the stuff that doesn't apply to that particular project that they want to do. Some of the things are illustrated because a picture can tell 1,000 words, and a lot of them have this sort of more information drilled in behind them. So every single one, you can go in and find out, why am I being asked this? How is this measured? What's the definition of it? And where's the original piece of policy or legislation that this is coming from? In this case here, we're just asking the question, do I need planning permission? In particular, because one of the things Southwark said is that a huge number of the calls they get to their lines are to ask this question, which is, do I need planning permission to change my windows? And you can see here it said, no, you don't, and here's the reasons why. And at this stage, it goes through and it tells you what your next steps are and then guides you to where to go to do those. Obviously, in future, we'd love it to go seamlessly through into applications, into the application submission itself. And there's a range of different outcomes that it can take you to. But the most important, so this is really nice in the sense that suddenly from having to dig through huge amounts of documents, etc., we can make it much, much easier for anybody to understand planning information using their mobile phone in a park if they want to. But absolutely the most important thing about this project, and I can't tell you how proud I am to say this, is that no artificial intelligence was involved in the making of it. It's driven entirely by planners' intelligence. Essentially what we realized is that the question at the heart of this is the issue that planning knowledge is all stuck in the head of planners, most of whom can't write code because they're busy being planners. And so essentially the challenge that we realized that was at the heart of this was, how do we tool up planners to write planning information in a way that machines can understand without having to learn to code? And essentially we found a way of doing that. It's flowcharts, basically. So behind Plantech is this editor interface where you can literally take a document like the one on the left and you can interpret that into a kind of a flowchart on the right. And it's amazing how often actually when you do that, the thing on the right, actually when you do this, you find loopholes. You find loopholes and gaps in the thing on the left actually when you do this. But anyone can do this. It's quite simple to do. And so that actually is what's going on with Plantech. Essentially what we've made is for those of you who are familiar with GitHub, it's a GitHub for planning information. And the cool thing about it as well is that you don't have to write everything yourself from scratch. It's through this platform also you can pull in stuff that's already been made by others, so you can share and collaborate. So for example, all the national level general permitted development stuff is pretty much already in there. And that will get updated and changed as others keep working on it. So it's also a kind of collaboration tool between councils. Obviously we've sort of picked out, we've gone through, you won't be able to see this tiny screen, but we've sort of, as we've gone along here, we've sort of begun to pick up, and hopefully as we begin to test this further, we'll be able to catch evidence against these, the various benefits that this has for everyone, right? In the sense that initially when we started looking at it, we were particularly interested in, these ones over here, the kind of satisfaction stuff, in other words, from the applicant's point of view, and no doubt it's huge. But actually more and more, we found ourselves learning stuff towards the right. So the obvious thing was, okay, wait a minute, costs is actually really interesting. Obviously, this ability to reduce the overhead burden on planners. But then equally, we discovered as we went along, some of these ones over here, which were sort of unexpected benefits, like, having reducing staff turnover potentially, and certainly, and of course, in the context of this building, this is really interesting, is making reporting much easier because the data is already there in a structured format, ready to be passed off to the LDD or whatever national databases might be there, instead of planners having to manually do data entry in order to do reporting. So there's loads and loads of systemic benefits to this. Finally, I just want to also lift the lid on saying another area that we think is really, really important area for innovation that doesn't really get talked about much or doesn't get talked about enough. And that is actually the business model behind it. So we can probably all agree that it's a really, really cool thing to be trying to build a really fantastic digital 21st century local government services that are open, that are interoperable, and that are data-driven. Now, there's lots and lots of challenges involved in doing that, but one of them is this question of, well, who should build these digital services? And at the moment, there are two kind of options or two kind of paradigms. One of them is the idea that the code should be built by the public sector, by public sector teams, like, for example, has been pioneered incredibly successfully by Government Digital Service. And then that code can be open sourced. So this is really, really good from a public value point of view. It's a bit tricky, though, when it comes to local governments, because truthfully, not every council has the capacity to have its own dev team taking and adopting open source code and customizing and publishing their own services. They really need it to be provided as software on a software as a service basis. So on the other side of the spectrum, you have the classic idea of private sector suppliers, but that comes with all the issues that come with that, which is that ultimately private sector suppliers have shareholders and therefore may have incentives to reduce the interoperability of their service and so on and so forth. I think all of you will be familiar with the sort of things I'm talking about. So we're trying to explore a different path that actually goes down the middle of these. So Plantech is actually, I've skipped one ahead there. Plantech is actually, the way we're approaching this is that we are providing it as software as a service basis, as well as a bunch of additional services to help you write and onboard your various planning information. But also we're licensing it under, it's either under an open source license or what we call the public service use license, which means it's open source for all public sector organizations. So in a way to try and say, let's have the best of both, let's have the best of both worlds. And that's the kind of boring sort of under the bonnet stuff, but we actually think it's critically important. Anyway, that's me. You can go and have a play with it yourself, because actually Southwark, Jack is here somewhere, Jack's over there. Southwark's Plantech domain is now live, so if you go onto their website and look to find out if you need planning permission, you can go and try that out. And we are currently working with Lambeth and Wickham, both of whom I can see here. And there's a bunch of other councils and planning authorities that we're talking to who are sort of hot on their heels. But obviously, we'll be downstairs. So if you're interested in sort of joining that cohort, please come and grab either me or my colleague Cleo at the back. Thank you very much indeed.
Hello, I'm Matthew from Hackney, and we're really excited today to be talking to you about a product that we've spent the last 12 months or so developing, and which is now ready to find out if we've managed to hit our goals. So hugely excited and also significantly nervous. You've heard from Jules Pipe, or Mayor Pipe as we used to call him in Hackney, that this is all about grand ambitions around affordable housing. From Alistair about how this is enabling a much more strategic view of planning. As the humble head of digital and data in Hackney Council, my starting question was, why in 2019 are we still publishing PDFs on a website? This doesn't feel very digital. 14 months in, I've had a glimpse into your world, and oh my gosh, isn't it much more complex than all of that? And secondly, as someone responsible for technology and data in a local authority, can I also just say sorry? So what we're about to show you is all available open source for people to reuse, steal or borrow, depending on how you want to see the world, or to enter into a different sort of partnership. As is in keeping with someone from the council, I'm here to tell you about the problem. And then Matthew, for we are poking one in the eye for diversity today with two speakers called Matthew, will tell you about how we've solved that problem. So we've worked in partnership on this with Snook. Snook is one of our fantastic Hackney-based digital agencies specialising in design, and Hacktar, who've helped us with the coding elements of this project, which is funded by MHCLG and their Planning Innovation Fund, and which we've very much done in collaboration with Southwark and the impressive stuff that they've got going on in Southwark. So what was the problem we were trying to solve? Well, the first big one, as in keeping with any local authority service, is the colossal amount of failure demand that happens around local government services, and of course planning is no different. So 90% of all of our planning applications arrive via the planning portal, quite right too, and of those 65% aren't actually valid. Which is not that so different from lots of other bits of local government service, but clearly that in itself generates a whole level of grief for users and cost both to our residents, to the businesses that represent them, and of course to hard-working local government officers. We've got 40,000 emails in a group inbox. To those of you who work in the sector, just 40,000. I know, aren't we doing well? Yes. We did have a figure about the number of spreadsheets that were involved in the system. It was in 3 figures and we couldn't validate it, so we took it out, but you can imagine how many different workarounds are also involved. And of the invalidity, gosh, aren't these some issues that ought to be really, really simple to solve? Documents that are incorrect, documents that are missing, documents that are mislabeled. Yes, it's already sounding like our EDRMS back at base. So what was the opportunity? Well, actually, it's not just about better PDFs on websites or different PDFs or PDFs with a better label. It's about shifting from a system which trades in shuffling paper around, and we call it digital paper because it's in a PDF format, to one which is fundamentally about data, as Alistair has just been talking to you about. We wanted to do this in a way that benefited our residents and their experience, so it was also about simplifying the submission journey and understanding how we might better do that. Ideally, therefore, giving us visibility over that end-to-end journey. So on the point of submitting a planning application or an application for a school place or anything else that you might be asking for, rather than having to pick up the phone, typically actually in planning terms on week 8 and say, where is my? Or contact your local councillor and say, could you ask them to ask where is my? Or contact the mayor and ask them to, yeah, you get it. But if we have visibility over that end-to-end journey, then we can provide our residents a much better experience and reduce lots of those frictions. We believe that if we got better data in, we just might get better data out. So no longer would we be dependent on handwritten scribbles on a PDF to determine how many 2-bedroom flats there were in a development, but we might actually be able to plan strategically for the provision of school places in 4 years. Radical thoughts, I know. And of course, the current submission journey, we are asking an awful lot of our users. So for our most diligent users, they might begin on the council website asking, actually, do I need permission for this thing? They might seamlessly nip on to Find My Nearest, which is another part of the council website, in order to identify the constraints around the address. They might then hop off to Planning Explorer, again, not quite in the same user experience as the other stuff, in order to view applications, and then hop across to Planning Portal, which does its part of the journey very well, before coming back to the council website and then having that traditional sort of void of uncertainty that happens whenever you transact with a local authority on a complicated thing, before finally getting some murky consequence at the end of it. So that's the problem we were trying to solve. Matthew's going to tell us how we did it.
Great. Thank you so much, Matthew. I'm Matthew. I'm a senior researcher and strategist at Snook. We're a design company, as Matthew said, but I'm also a developer and data scientist, so I kind of come for this from kind of both problems. I recognise there's only one screen that you can see, and this is very a visual part of the presentation, so I'm going to sort of stand out the way a little bit and not use the microphone so you can see as much as possible. I think we're just trying to get things sorted. So yeah, as Matthew mentioned, can you kind of see from there? Sort of. So as Matthew mentioned, the submission journey is very complex, and as Alistair has talked about, you have to jump between potentially 8 different services. You might have various PDFs printed out on your desk trying to navigate the planning system. what we wanted to do is provide a single journey for somebody. So firstly, we've been working in very close collaboration with Plantech, thinking about this kind of like policy as data problem. And so a lot of what we're going to show you is quite similar. I suppose we've kind of come to the same problem but arrived at similar solutions. So the first thing is, what can I do and what have others done is all part of the Submit My Plan service. So you actually start with a kind of postcode search, select your address, and it brings back all of the GIS data that the planning authority hold on that property. It also brings back past applications. And then from there, you can kind of launch into an application process directly. We have what's called a dynamic form, very similar to Plantech, in that as you answer questions, the dynamic form is kind of powered by both the GIS data that we have, but also the kind of answers that you've given at various parts of the form. We only ask for documents and files that we need. So again, kind of leveraging GIS data and the description of works. And then lastly, we kind of inflow payment. You get email notifications directly through the service. And in future, we'd like to be able to support a kind of read-write access between back office systems and this kind of front end. So I'm going to sort of show you a few kind of demos of what we've built. So I guess the kind of solution is like we only want to ask people questions that we need the answers to. So very often we're asking people questions that the planning authority already has the answer for. And I guess the question is like, why are we doing that? It seems quite wasteful on planning officers' time and quite frustrating for users because they then have to go and find the answers. So I'm going to show you the Find My Site feature. So this is hopefully going to autoplay. No? I'll describe it to you. I'll describe what happens. There is a video, technically a video here. So what happens is you put in your postcode, you select the address from a drop-down menu, and then you get rendered all of the sort of planning constraints and kind of relevant geographic information that you might need. So if it's in a conservation area, is a listed building, tree preservation order, et cetera, et cetera. You also get this red line map. So we already have the kind of boundary data that we have for the site. So we don't have to kind of ask for that at a later date. When someone's submitting their location plan, they can just confirm, yes, that is the boundary of my site. There's no need to kind of download or pay for a map, which then is just going to be visually compared in the planning office. I would love to show you the dynamic form, but unfortunately the video is not working. So what happens is we start asking you questions about your site, and then the form re-renders. It's a bit like a decision tree, very similar to the Plantech system. Long gone are the days where you have to answer questions about parking spaces if you're just replacing your windows, or being asked questions that are completely irrelevant to the work that you're trying to do. So you describe the work that you're doing, and the form is intelligent enough to kind of understand that and then kind of propagate from there. And this applies to things like files and document uploads as well. So we ask for documents that are relevant based on your work. Again, I would show you inflow payment. So we leverage here a system called gov.uk Pay, which is a central government service that's available for any public body with a .gov.uk top-level domain. So as public servants, you can actually access this service, and it provides a very seamless, very well integrated payment solution that also kind of integrates with back office sort of reconciliation processes as well. So we don't need to take recurring payments and things like that. So it's just one-off payments, and it's a very kind of it's a very kind of elegant user experience. I think the one thing, so this is the one thing that doesn't have any videos. So I suppose, as Matthew said, and we've been talking about kind of open source and open architecture, it's not necessarily sort of a visible feature, but actually the sort of everything that's in the pink box is part of the Submit My Planning application system. So what we've done is we've built a kind of new data standard or kind of new data schema to describe planning applications. We have been kind of watching the LGA's LDD work as well, and we'll be looking at the schema we designed is very flexible, so we can kind of adapt that as we need to. But essentially, it's a system of many parts, and what we're trying to do is build a kind of data service that people can interact with And actually from here, you can start building out other kind of interfaces. So you could build, for example, a consultation interface, or you could build an interface for planners to interact with this data in a more kind of intuitive way. Similarly, you could also build kind of data extractors. That means that you can automatically submit data to the LDD without either kind of a click of a button, essentially. So yeah, I guess the future, I think, is like thinking about planning data more as a service. I think there's a huge amount of value in planning data, which are currently locked away inside PDFs. And if we think about what the potential of planning data could offer to a kind of UK GDP perspective, I think the potential is enormous and has enormous public value. And so I think that's the kind of key message that I'd like to leave you with. One last kind of message, which is that, so Snook, we're a design company, we've been running for 10 years. About 3 months ago, we were acquired and merged with Northgate. But we continue to be Snook as a design company, and we still continue to do the work that we do. But in many ways, we've started our conversation with the planning team at Northgate, and kind of around to help maybe kind of disrupt and kind of improve the products and services that Northgate build for local authorities. So I'm happy to kind of talk to anybody about that after this conversation. But yeah, so thank you so much, and thanks for sticking with the technology.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to give a short, if I get my slides up, just a short intro into the work that we're doing here at City Hall. I'm London's first Chief Digital Officer, and a lot of the work, essentially we are looking at broadly what's called a smart city, but essentially looking at the digital transformation of our public services so we can use data and innovation to serve our citizens more effectively. Yes, excellent. Right. So it's my pleasure to address you today, and there's a lot of talk about what a smart city is, and certainly when I joined almost 2 years to the day, I was sort of thrown into, what this was, and I'm actually not that interested in discussing like whether we're like Toronto or Dubai or other cities. And quite often people talk about a smart city as a sort of noun. You have to have a smart district or a set of smart technologies or a big data platform in order to be a smart city. And I just sort of used the opportunity to reframe it more as a process, because I think the most important thing is how we design around our citizens. And our approach focuses heavily on that tradition that came out of government digital service around citizen-centered design, and creating just digital services so good that people would prefer to use them. So as a city, we want to champion that people-first approach. We want to be a test bed for civic innovation, so to try things that other people won't be willing to try, and to think about how things are really amplified and scaled. And quite often, I came from the local government world. I mean, it's still in the local government world, but I was a councillor in Camden for 15 years, and quite often you'd kind of like put money into an expensive pilot, and then you'd just go, well, if it works, then we'll just sort of scale it across the organisation. And of course, life is a lot more nuanced than that. And so we've really got to think about how collaboration works, and if necessary, create new institutions for that to happen. So what do I mean by digital? What do I mean by London? In the context of London, digital, the definition here is from a former director of GDS, Tom Loosemore, applying the culture, practices, processes, and technologies of the internet era to respond to people's raised expectations. So it's not just about kit or platforms or even services. It's also about that way of working. And that's the sort of the point that we wanted to make right at the start of this discussion. And of course, with London, we've got 9 million citizens living across 32 boroughs, served by an array of public agencies and a massive tech cluster around us. How do we mobilize all of those either in unison or build a really effective coalition of the willing so we can do more than do our job in our own department or within our own borough, but in collections of boroughs, finding like-minded people so that we can work together. And our pressing concern in London is population growth, because by these projections, certainly we're the biggest we've ever been as a city, surpassing, I think, its previous high total in 1939. And by the middle of the century, we could be 2 million more people in this city. And how does that impact on public services, congestion, mobility? Where are we going to house people? These are all the really big questions that fundamentally motivate us at the GLA as a strategic authority. And here, I think data and how we use data will be a really, really important way of meeting these challenges. Technology won't provide, total solutions to these things, but they will certainly help us and help our insights and help us design better solutions for our citizens. And here we have our mayoral strategies in full length. That would probably be about 950 pages, but I have boiled them down neatly into what I believe their fundamental outcomes are. A zero carbon city, changing the transport mix. That means 80% of journeys by walking, cycling or public transport by 2041. Devolved health responsibilities, addressing the housing shortage, culture and the 24-hour city, really, really important part of what makes London distinctive, and making sure culture is shared across the city. Good growth, supported by the next London plan, currently with the planning inspector, and skills Londoners need, the new powers that we have as the mayoralty around skills, which mean a sort of slight shift from us being a strategic authority to actually delivering skills, commissioning bodies to deliver skills. That means a great understanding, a great thirst has to develop for data about people and where they live and what their families are like, and all of the things that might stop people succeeding or gaining the opportunities that are on their doorstep. Really important to us. So data is playing a really important role for us there. And we've changed in our data needs and how we use data at City Hall. In a sense, it's always been a data-enabled, a data-driven body from when it was set up. But in 2010, of course, we famously launched the London Data Store, which is a resource for people right across London and the country on understanding what goes on in our city. And broadly speaking, that started with pretty sort of static sort of data sets, sort of like how many trees are in London and various socio-economic indicators, and has grown to be something which also has a secure data layer, so we can get deeper insights. So Schools Atlas is a really good example. We can do place planning for schools because we get data from the Department of Education about people, and we can match it with the other data sets that we have, and we can also make it publicly functional. When people make their choices about what school to send their kids to, they can consult that and read through to the Ofsted report and figure out sort of green ways of walking to school and school distances and all of those things that are actually really important to people when they make their decisions. And the infrastructure map there at the bottom, it's effectively a data trust. Before people called it data trust, it's a sharing of data between construction from developers and utilities that allow us to pinpoint where construction is happening. So people dig up the road once and they maximize their investment, and most importantly, they stop traffic jams and digging up the roads loads of times. That is effectively the sharing of private data, the sharing of commercial data that wouldn't really exist if there wasn't a trusted intermediary such as the Mayor of London. But in the future, we will have access to much more individualized data from mobile phones. In a sense, a smart city is, pretend this was a phone, everyone's a sensor, potentially, in that. And the ability to collect data about how people move around the city or move around systems will give us great insights into future developments and design and what people actually want and need, the kind of desire lines of the city. So that forces us to build new capabilities and change the way that we work. Why does it matter? Because data traditionally is taken from big aggregate sets, and we kind of look at it and try and spot patterns, and then we drill down and look at how individuals fit into those big patterns. And we've set up a whole bureaucracy about people just kind of like, let's look at that cohort there and then, send out some researchers, talk to some real people. But if you have data that's about people's movement from their passenger journeys on a mobile phone, that tracks their individual movements, and you aggregate that, you put that together, and it gives you a bigger picture, which may well be different from the one that you had using the traditional mode. So those two things will basically be happening at the same time. So we'll need to have different skill sets in our public services. One to do that traditional analysis, and another one to do that kind of analysis, and just sort of ponder how that would affect the planning and economic development framework of London when we get those deeper insights. So those are the sort of things that we're really thinking about now. And this fits within a wider context. Open data, accessible data creates the conditions for improved insight, as we've already seen, and the development of new products and services. So our work creating a live planning data portal fits very neatly into that top category. If we publish this information openly, people would be able to create products on the back of that, disrupt the market, give us insights that we didn't have time to develop. Imagine if we could, just thinking off the top of my head, someone could create a product for meanwhile use in this city, connect with developers who have vacant property. Can we put it to more productive ends? Not saying that someone can do that, but it's the kind of thing that live data, open data will enable. But more than this, we will see something really interesting as our city becomes smarter with 5G, and effectively AI and 5G and smart cities are kind of different aspects of the same thing, in my opinion, from sort of different groups of people usually trying to sell you something. But 5G will be a really interesting development because the city will play a role in how that technology gets rolled out, because it relies on small cell technology, which needs to be bolted onto something in short distances. And the biggest owner of things you can bolt things onto is us. It's the city, it's city government. And so we'll have a role in the development of this technology because it will be attached to our buildings and our lampposts. Our 650,000 lampposts in London will play a role in this. And what's our relationship with data with those companies? Are we just going to rent the lampposts to them and, fund our services? Or we can ask for a share of that data so we can understand our citizens more? The really interesting questions for London city government, and also city government outside of, and town government outside of London. Vast amounts of data plays into AI, and AI is able to process data from multiple sources and learn and propose solutions to more complex urban problems. There's no way, in my opinion, that we'll be able to tackle the major scourge of poor air, illegal, people breathing effectively illegal quality air in London without sensors and data and citizens collecting their own data and feeding it through to something. And that something will be AI systems that will enable us to develop new solutions like super versions of the low emission zone, or targeting behaviours in certain ways, or giving people incentives. All of those things will be proposed, we think, from that information. And cities are places where AI and this data debate will be developed and tested, and they'll be at the forefront of this debate, which is really significant for us because we lack the power to pass laws if something goes wrong. And so we'll be the test beds for all of these things, and perhaps SW1, Whitehall and Westminster are a little bit behind us. And we've seen some of those things play out even over the summer with discussions around facial recognition technology use in King's Cross. So municipal government really at the forefront of this, and certain professions within that government will also be being posed questions that we might not readily have answers to. So our approach, and these are the 5 missions of Smarter London Together, is not to kind of create a plan for a smart city, like a blueprint, we will have X number of sensors or electric vehicles or, energy efficient buildings. although we do have targets around that. Our first 3 years is focused very much on how this organisation works with boroughs to build that capability for us to be more open to the possibilities of data. Why should the possibilities of data just be open to commercial firms to monetize and make profit from? Why can't we properly use data to solve citizens' problems? We have agency here. So a focus on user-designed services, that meaning championing the government service standard and other design principles in what we do, which often means a break from the traditional way of doing things in municipal government. City data, by that I mean the concept of a data as an asset for the city and better data sharing across the city, whether it's open data or secure data sharing between agencies. World-class connectivity and smarter streets. A major challenge for us, of course, in the planning system is how we make London more connected. Its full fibre to the home isn't adequate. It's like stubbornly at about 11%. And the planning system has a major role to play in that. And as I say, smarter streets, how do we use those assets to make our city smarter? Investing in digital leadership and skills, primarily for this purposes of this in the public sector, but also the talent for our wider workforce. And we want people to choose jobs not just in the tech sector, but come and work with us in purpose-driven public service and help solve some of the big problems facing our citizens, make our city better. And improving citywide collaboration, not through things like big joint procurements and shared services and all of that. I've been involved in those, overgoverned, maybe appropriate in some cases, but that's not what I mean by collaboration. That's like enforced collaboration. I mean creating new institutions and networks where people who really want to make a difference and change things can get together and draw power from one another. And the power of public servants coming together, leaving their job title at the door and thinking, how do we solve this problem? We want to help people with methods and process and funding in order for that to happen. And our work underway in this area in the planning sector sort of wants to really reflect that. We have a Smart London board, which I chair, which is almost exclusively looking at the interplay between infrastructure and urban environments and data and the issues that come from that. Our draft London plan, now at Planning Inspector, I can't say anything about that, but I certainly pitched for some bold propositions around connectivity and guidance on the use of standards in smart technologies. How can we use the planning system to open up that debate about standards of sensors that you put in things? Are they secure? How have they been designed? And that the planning process is like a really wonderful thing, having sat on a planning committee for 6 years, is that just by introducing a question, it means that a committee can talk about something that otherwise might not have been able to be talked about in quite a powerful setting, the most powerful settings in local government. And of course, ambitions around connectivity, full fibre to the home, and how we install other infrastructure assets, all really important there. Our London data store, we're now working with the Open Data Institute for its next iteration. So how do we make it not just a place where open data is shared and some secure data? How do we understand the needs of our users in local government community, in business community, and also in civil society, so we can make it a true data platform for the next decade? Our work on live planning data hub here, reforming the London Development Database, and opening up that planning information, I think will just be like a fundamental step for planning in London. For too long we've laboured under legacy IT systems, and the clarity of data has just not been there. We've made do, but we can do so much better. We do work on digital twins, so that's like mapping the city digitally so we can understand it in a slightly different way. A great startup called Appy Ways, which used to be called Appy Parking, it's just done a digital twin map of every single parking space in London. Now, that might seem to be, a bit of a weird one, but actually think about the potential, without doing that mapping, without knowing precisely each parking space. We can't even start considering what the future pavement might look like in the next 15 years when people are doing more car sharing, or they're different models rather than just owning your own vehicle and using it 10% of the time. These things are really interesting for the future of the city to me. 3D modelling, we're doing a pilot study on the uses of mobile data with companies. So data that mobile companies have gathered to citizens, we've bought a chunk of it. And so is it useful for the planning process or the economic development process? And supporting borough innovation through as I say, a new institution to promote collaboration, that sense of goodwill and momentum in our city called the London Office of Technology and Innovation, which has started with 15 boroughs. Those are the boroughs that had the most hunger to get together. It's run by London councils, funded in part by us. Eddie Copeland now directs it. He used to be at Nesta, the Director of Government Innovation there. And the work of the 15 supports all boroughs. And there's a really big focus on that big question of data sharing, as well as enhancing those collective capabilities of our city. So through this, we want to kind of create the foundations for people to work together in whatever the way they want, not working in a kind of way that you're tracked by someone or you're forced to be in a meeting with someone, but actually saying, I will have an interest on a certain problem with someone else in the city, and those, planned or incidental interactions are fostered even more with this real sort of tailwind of change and a feeling that we really want to reform things and drive things forward. So LOTI is our big institution to do that. It sets the tone for the next 18 months, which, as I said, is developing greater capabilities around data and talking to citizens and public service professionals about the use of data so we can solve our city problems. And with our commitment to work in the open in London, which comes from our signing something called the Local Digital Declaration, which is an MHCLG thing which we crafted, a kind of declaration on our ways of working in a digital way, working in an agile way. We've published all of our actions publicly on the Smarter London Together report card, which is, as you notice, a Trello, controversially, and that you can chart all of the actions that we're doing, if we've changed them, what the progress is on them, because this area is quite complex and we need to make it sure that it's as visible as possible to the people who work in this field. So please do take a look, and thank you very much.
So next we move on to a project which is a little bit left field. It comes from Arcadis, who are doing a lot of work with Manchester around monitoring site developments. So it's not Peter Holt as advertised. Do you want to come and introduce yourself? Yeah, thank you very much. The technological moment, we're nearly there. And it's on flash.
Just want to reset it.
You're right.
Are we there? Okay. So thank you very much. My name is Joe Welch, not Peter Hogg. I'm going to present to you for about 10 minutes a system that's been built called City Analytics. I guess there's a lot of theory out here today, but this is an actual solution to an actual problem built by planners for planners. I'm going to show you 3 more slides, and the reason I'm going to have to stand at the back of the room for this 10 minutes is that I'm going to log on to the system live and demonstrate it to you and ask some questions of it and show you the sort of answers you can get back from it. And then hopefully it'll inspire you to show you a little bit about, mention of the private sector earlier, but we are there collaborating with public sector, local authorities, and this is one of the things that we've built. So a few slides and then I'll show you a demonstration. So in terms of background, if you look at the screen, you won't need to arc your neck my way. What we have is effectively built an MVP that's about to go into beta for a system called City Analytics. It started from an event we held with GMCA, the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, and among others, the private sector developers, landowners up in the northwest in the old Granada studios. One thing that came out of that design thinking workshop was effectively the length it takes to create the evidence base for a local plan, and this fact of local plan creation transcending political cycles, and then that local plan, either evidence base being out of date or a new political view that maybe isn't in accordance with the previous local plan that was working its way through the development framework process. Now, what we've done is effectively built this application to be forward-looking, investment-focused, flexible, and evidence-based. So we started off with a view to digitizing and automating the evidence gathering that you have to go through for a local plan. Now, this is effectively what we want City Analytics to be eventually, and what you'll see in front of you is a slide showing in, I guess, the horseshoe around the top, the different stakeholders that are here in the planning and development system, and then along the bottom there, you've effectively got the different sectors that City Analytics is seeking to be involved in. What I'm going to demonstrate to you today is that element that's in orange. So we're talking about planning authorities, and we're talking about housing and plan making to a certain extent, but I will touch on quite briefly how we've semi-pivoted a few times to respond to the needs of the client themselves. So this is co-funded by Greater Manchester Combined Authority. The pilot has been with Bolton District Council, and I have sat with Bolton District Development Control Officers and policy officers for the last year building this system. And I guess the three things that I'm going to draw your attention to when I demonstrate the system is the boxes along the right-hand side there. So what we're talking about is automated site forecasting, early site viability testing, quantifying economic and social value, and enabling a housing delivery forecast which is robust. So when I show you the system, I'm going to theorize some questions that you might ask of it, and hopefully provide some answers. But I guess at some level, what we're trying to solve here is the lack of transparency that exists in the planning system, and the fact that huge amounts of data is double-handled. And in my personal view, not that of Arcadis, but I feel like perhaps the reason we have the outcomes we have is because we don't have the data to show people the impact of their decisions, be that the local authority from a political level, or the development industry from a land value capture or social aspect. So without further ado, I'll show you the system, which is it's web-based, so anybody can access it with a license. It's built by our data team based in Sheffield, but it's been in collaboration with Greater Manchester Combined Authority. So you'll all be familiar with the GIS system. You can turn all sorts of data layers on, ward boundaries, land registry, green belt. I'm not going to go through all of these individually because I think most of you will be familiar with websites where you can look at information and turn layers on and turn layers off. I guess where it starts to get quite interesting, though, is if you can ask questions of the system, if you can ask intelligent questions and get intelligent answers, then we're starting to get into a space where we're using the systems to do the heavy lifting for us. So there's different planning policy layers that we've got in here, planning context. I won't go through them in any detail, but we are going to touch on them as we run through the system. But if we start off with just some flood zones, and I guess that the first thing that we've come up with local authorities looking at sites from a development control or even a planning policy point of view is what are the land constraints, and quite quickly we can understand the land constraints that exist. Yes, that's interesting, but what we've done is done geospatial analysis on understanding if these constraints exist on the site. We've then written an algorithm that, for example, nets off what we consider non-developable area. We've then taken this net developable area and we've looked up and created a SHMA compliant accommodation schedule. So effectively, we're already gone substantially further than a SHLA already does. So in this instance, it's a planning policy compliant mix. We're then allowing the planners themselves to change the net to gross or the density or the affordable housing percentage to do viability testing at that plan making stage. So already the government came out last year and said, and I was up in Greater Manchester yesterday looking at the GMSF with Three Dragons for their viability testing. And rather than try and create types of site to viability test, what we're actually doing in the system I'm showing you is testing the viability of 5,000 SHLA sites across Greater Manchester in real time. So what we're able to do is play with the levels of affordable housing, for example, and what you'll see is the viability bar at the top changing, and we haven't yet built the function to goal seek this, but it could tell you each site what the actual affordable housing policy could be site-specific, were you so inclined to create a policy to that effect. Now, the viability, this is a residual land value, so what we're doing is we're taking a SHLA, we're netting off non-developable area, we're then looking based on its proximity to sustainable transport, what density we feel we can build at, we're creating a SHMA-compliant accommodation mix, we're then looking at land registry sales values, we're looking at BCI's build costs, we're looking at a benchmark land value. In real time, we're creating a viability position for this site. That's thus. And you can change certain things within the viability appraisal itself to actually generate and see what a viable site is. What's quite interesting as well is we've been working with a company called Social Value Portal. So if I just click in and click out of this, you'll see that there is a marginal viability position here. But if we were to, for example, make the site unviable, and update the site record, what we can then see is that, so this site, based on 35% affordable housing, whilst it might have a viability position of negative £400,000, with Social Value Portal, we've calculated that it's got a wider scheme value of £2 million. So what we're able to do is change the narrative around being profit-led and housing numbers-led, which is the entire focus of the planning system at the moment, into actually what we can create in terms of social and environmental betterment. So this is already being used by Bolton District Council to apply for grant to the to Homes England. And if I'll show you an example of some work we've done with them already, where we've taken 30 sites which they owned, which we looked up based on their own land ownership, and we've labelled them as grant candidates. And what we can do for all of these 5,000 sites across Greater Manchester is we can sort and filter them based on their viability position, based on their size. So you can start to imagine the questions you can ask the system. If I'm a planner and I've been told by a director I need to get more SMEs involved in delivering homes in our area, I can start to sort and search maybe by number of dwellings. And I can start to understand which are the sites with the viability challenges, because from here I can click straight into them and I can choose to, as a planner, work on them. So if I'm interested in a particular site, I can click in and out of them, and I can better understand, turning back some of these layers on, what is it that's causing the viability issue. And if I know anything about the viability, or I have the ability to even get some colleagues to assist me, I can start to make new decisions about the affordable housing levels, viability, real time. So what this is, I guess in short, is a tool with which to empower planners to be proactive, not reactive. I guess that's one of the key takeaways that I want people to see from this system. We're absolutely not interested in removing planning judgment and planning balance. What we're trying to do is empower planners to make informed decisions, and what we have seen already is a response from members in Bolton where they feel better placed to make judgments and challenge developers because they have effectively early views into viability. And I guess if we were talking at a plan making stage, what we've got effectively is a real-time 5-year land supply. I mean, avert your eyes for the unviable sites, but this is the north of England we're talking about. And what we can do is we can create any window into the data that the local authority wants, be it tenure, unit type, if you want to target certain house types. This is a platform from which you can undertake ask it all sorts of questions and get all sorts of different answers. And in 5 or 6 minutes, that's all I can show you. But I am around all day, and I welcome any questions or queries.
To proofread things before they get printed. Next we have Paul Downey from MHCOG's Digital Land. He's not here to give you money, he's here to tell you about the work of Digital Land, which is all rather exciting at the moment. So I hand over to Paul, and apologies.
That's fine. Oh, blimey. So yeah, hello, I'm Paul, I'm from the Ministry. I run a small team called Digital Land. We're a mixture of digital and policy people. Why is that flicking around? We're a mixture of digital and policy people, and we're sort of trying to, sounds kind of ludicrous, we're trying to fix the housing market with data. And I was sort of embarrassed to say that when I first started working on this, but the economists were telling me, yeah, that's right. Actually, one of the main reasons why marketplaces do fail is lack of information or information disparity. So if we go to a negotiation, I know more about something than you do, then I'll win. And that's kind of one of the problems that we have in housing, that there's a limited number of companies who know, or people who know like how to build and where to build. And we sort of think that also if we sort of make more data and information available, that'll change or transform the relationship between development and community, which is probably going to make a lot of planners' lives easier, we hope, but also help people understand, what they're getting back in the community from a development. We have a sort of mental model by what we mean by about data and how this is going to work. And so if we had more information available, then people can build services. And those services are like how you discover and find out things. So the housing market's quite wide. It's quite a broad thing, from plan making through to delivery to working out whether the house is any good or not. And to work those things out, you're probably going to go to a website or use a service or talk to somebody. And the more information we can make available, the better those services get. And the other thing I should say is that government's not going to build all those services. We want to enable this marketplace. And in fact, it's highly desirable that we have competition, that these services overlap. So we have competition and we sort of reduce the risk of disintermediation, where one big company comes in and becomes the place to find the data. It should just be available to everybody. So what do we mean by data? It's a thorny subject. It just means stuff. But by and large, we don't really look at data. We look at the things that are made with data. And that's part of the problem, that actually there's sort of lots of places you can find data, but it's been baked into a cake. And it's quite hard to extract those raw ingredients from the cake. And the other thing I would say about data is there's kind of two kinds of sort of data. There's sort of sampling, which I think Theo was talking about when he was saying about data about individuals. That sounded sounded a little bit scary, but it's sort of, by and large, you can aggregate lots of fine-grained information and actually make better decisions than doing what we tend to do at the moment, which is sample things and guess. So a lot of the other thing that you can do with data is you can sort of understand rules. So I don't want to pick on the local authority who made this because it's very typical, but in a local plan, this is how you can't open a fast food restaurant within 400 metres of a school is communicated to people. And so the consequences of obviously opening a fast food restaurant within one of those red blobs is you'll get shut down. But actually, what would be better is you've understood the rule and then you had the data where the schools were. And so when new schools came along, you weren't relying on something that was out of date or gets you shut down. The other thing to say is that sometimes those cakes, those things that have been baked from the data, are actually the thing. So developer contributions, Section 106 agreements, viability assessments, those are documents which you could turn into data and actually are made from data. but there's nuance in them. Viability assessments are quite magical documents that a developer could take to an investor and say, look, we're going to make loads of money from this development, and then take the same document and take it to the council and say, not much profit in this, and that's one of the tricky things about these things, is that this is something we're sort of learning, is that we can set rules and say how things should be recorded as data going forwards, but to actually look at historical documents and deeds and notices, it sort of loses the essence of them. We just sort of say they're data. But a good place to start is to make them open and to make lists of them, which is kind of what we're doing with developer contributions. And that means you can start to do some very remedial, simple things, like make dashboards, just say how much money is coming into the community. And that although it's quite simple and obvious, it sort of has some value. Some of the stuff we're talking about is kind of evolutionary and it's quite remedial, but still has massive value in a land where we don't have much data. And then the other thing is to sort of remember is one of those things that you bake data into and give to people is like one use case. And so something as humble as a tree preservation order, is used in lots to inform lots of decisions. It informs design, it informs where you might go to a site, it informs, when a conveyancer when they buy and sell a property. And, surprisingly, it also informs people who are going to chop trees down. It's not just about buying and selling, it's about preserving trees. And the other thing I think that happens at the moment is a lot of the data is geospatial that we're talking about, but it's not always the best way of relating things. Sure, it'd be quite nice to put the pins in maps and look at things, but it's much stronger if we can connect things. So the concept of something that applies to a flat that might be on a particular floor or in a complex development, it's much better to use the land registry title or the unique bit, the UPRN or some strong identifier, so you can start to relate things and increase the precision of our data. And of course, the obvious thing to say is, we're in the ministry, so we're kind of looking at the country as a whole, same as the GLA does here. And yet we've devolved, for good reasons, to look communities to make decisions, and even further to neighbourhoods. And then, you have developments and you have people who can look after things like, building regulations. So any data we pick, if it's inside our building, we can make it open quite quickly. But if it's inside a local authority, we have to do a bit more work to make that available nationally. And then if it's in a parish, then it takes a bit more work. And if it's in a company, and you can see. So one of the challenges we have is that we might have a brilliant idea that some data is valuable, but to get it available nationally, we have to sort of think quite strategically and wait. And you can sort of see the kind of work that's involved in that is, in one of my favourite things at the moment is, it's a little bit old, but mapping Greater Manchester. Not so much because they've made this sort of lovely spaghetti map of all these polygons and shows all the layers. It's that on their website they talk quite openly about how much work it was to find that data and to assemble it and to sustain it, to keep it going. So really, the message that we keep coming across when we're talking to these people who want to make services that we want to make data available to is that how hard it is to find it, find it nationally. Getting all the tree preservation orders onto one map, very hard. When you do find it, it's quite hard to understand the data you get. And then to consume it, to build a service on top of that, involves a large leap of faith, a lot of trust. And something that the first people I spoke to were hitting us with was, we as a department were publishing energy performance certificates, which are not that interesting in themselves, but at least did have addresses and floor space and an energy rating. And that was used to inform all sorts of decisions, from green mortgages to people lending deposits for rents. And we stopped publishing it because, for a number of reasons, but understanding the nuances and the implications of GDPR was one of them. And so as a department, we sort of did some policy work, which is not what I expected to be doing when I arrived in the department, to sort of try and get that republished. And those things are really kind of hard work, but they kind of have high value. So suddenly, as a digital person, as a techie, I'm sort of find myself talking to people, and it's a bit weird. But the value of talking to people is that you can have impact in lots of different ways. And so the funding we're doing at the moment is trying to help local authorities make this data available, because by and large we're asking them to do stuff. And we can also make regulation, try and make things available, and we can try and remove some of the constraints, especially on maps. And so we can hopefully have better outcomes. We did a lot of work recently on trying to improve this brownfield lands site, and a lot of that is providing feedback to the people publishing the data to help them know when it's not so good. And so we're kind of evolving this design process where we go from an idea like a brownfield site and help people have the outcome. And if you go to our website, you can see all these projects, which by themselves are not that great or not that interesting, but actually together we think will actually have an impact as we start to relate them together. And that involves working with policy teams. One of the things we did recently is we visited every website, council website, and found their local plan and tried to get some housing numbers out of it. And it's a bit rude, and that's kind of not what we want to do. We want to actually get the councils to tell us what to do, what they're doing, the local planning authorities to give us information. And so going back to that idea about the data being written in text, which is hard to understand, we've evidenced that with screenshots. And you can go, if you go to our website, you can see some of this work. And that led to something which I stole from Connected Places catalogue, which is that it'd be really useful to sort of say what policy areas are covered by each local plan. And one of the other projects we're looking at is planning. Can we make decision notices and planning applications more broadly available? And really that involves actually looking at processes, but actually working with people like the Snook project in Hackney and the work that's going on in GLA. This again was made by Connected Places catalogue, trying to understand the ecosystem of projects about. And so although we're sort of able to ratify some of the work that comes out of it, by and large, most of the work is being done in those projects, and we're learning from them. Okay, so you can go to our website and find out more, and I'm happy to talk to anybody about what we're doing. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name's Jack. I'm from over the road at Southwark, and I'm a town planner. So we have recently, in the last year or so, begun a programme of leveraging, or trying to leverage digital and data innovation to redesign our planning service. One of the 3 products starting its alpha phase this month, everything's happened at the same time, is a development viability tool. So just viability in 3 slides. 1, 2, 3. Building on work done by the Catapult and Encraft a couple of years ago, last year we engaged FutureGov somewhere to run a discovery. Viability is an inherently complex subject, but where we thought there was scope was to streamline the process and the admin around it. So our how might we problem statement was just that. How might we scope and prototype a better way to evaluate viability assessments? What do we do? What do we deliver? If you squint, we delivered some user needs and insights, maps, both existing and future state, 2 concepts, a prototype and a business case. Our main insights were viability assessments. They're used as a negotiation tool. There is a data imbalance between councils and developers, and they are not standardised. So the data opportunities we identified during this discovery were to make or try and make them machine readable, expose third-party data sources and our own via APIs, and to provide data-driven tools. Concept one. So first concept was obviously we need the buy-in from developers to make this work. So first concept was an assessment checker for the developers. Second was a review and comparison tool for officers within the council. The prototype was to demonstrate how we could integrate third-party data to see if we could and if it would work and if it helped. Our future state map is very, very small, but where we think there is enormous potential is to make efficiencies, but also to make viability more accessible, both for us, but the public, and for small and medium-size builders. So on that, as of Tuesday, we started having conversations with Gateshead as well, because an element to one of their pieces of work is viability. So we hope we can try and tie up there. What are we doing now? We are working, so now we're progressing into alpha. So we're working with Catapult, Tower Hamlets and the GLA to design the alpha with the goals of testing prototypes, address specific questions around desirability, feasibility and viability of the solutions, and generating wider awareness and buy-in in the sector. To achieve those, we want to test, sorry, it's not ideal this, but we want to test those three experiences, so service, application, and also data. Our hopeful outcomes go from, on one side, making sure that everything that's required to make an assessment is provided upfront, right at the beginning, which often isn't the case. So that's a short-term outcome, but then all the way through to hoping to generate wider innovation in the Plantech sector off the back of this. And obviously to enable that, everything is open and freely available. So all our work at all points is publicised and available. Lastly, our timetable. We hope to deliver a roadmap for all of that stuff, but also a roadmap for taking it into beta by the 9th of, beginning of December. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Molly Strauss on the GLA's infrastructure team.
And I'm Peter Kemp, I'm the Planning Change Manager.
And we are going to run you through a number of projects very quickly, so please bear with us. The most important thing to say up front is that we are talking about London's digital twins here. That's a really broad category, and you'll see what that means to us as we start to talk. But the way that we've approached it at the GLA is under the guidance of Theo, who you heard from before, our Chief Digital Officer. We pursue digital twins across different teams at the GLA. So there isn't a unified digital twin team. Instead, each team that needs to answer a specific question produces a digital product that gives the answer to that question. So we're not going to go through all of these, but you can see there's a number of different built environment issues that we need to understand. And so we don't just sort of think what fancy piece of technology could we build. We ask the question first and find the solution to it through a digital product. The first thing we're going to tell you about is the Development Data Automation Project. This starts with a problem that we identified, which is that it's really difficult to know what's happening on the ground in London, or to be frank, anywhere else in the UK. We don't have good data about development and planning application information, even though we do in London have the existing London Development Database, which does collect monitoring information, but only for a limited number of planning application types, sort of up to a certain threshold, and also not in real time. And it's a really manual process to get that information collected. And so it doesn't serve our purposes in terms of planning, in terms of infrastructure planning, et cetera. So because the planning system wasn't designed to collect data easily, we needed to change that in order to solve this problem. Just to give you a really quick overview, the LDD has existed since 2004, and we think that the current way, actually we don't think, we discovered through a 6-month discovery period, that the current way we collect information in the LDD, which is asking local authorities to provide it to us manually, costs London about £1 million a year, which doesn't seem sensible given the alternatives that we could have. So this is sort of an overview of what we found. I'm not going to dwell on it, just to say there were changes that would be required in order to automate this process, starting from the submission portal through the back office systems and out to the end to a database, if what we were trying to do was produce an automated feed of planning application data for London. The existing process involves collecting information that comes into back office systems by looking through PDFs and re-entering that information into a system. Instead, we thought, couldn't we ask the right questions up front, and it would travel directly through the system? And Peter will tell you about what that looks like.
So as part of this, we explored at length who was really interested in this information, what the personas of all the relevant parties were, and what their real pain and pressure points were. There's a few people in the room that were involved in this, and I'm sure it was an interesting journey. One of the big challenges we certainly had in London was there are so many different systems in place, and this was the map as it was 6 months ago, and it's moved on since, and I'm sure many of you are looking at different procurement opportunities and where you're going with this. So the vision for where we are headed has actually got 3 big groups of parties involved in it. On the first, we have on the left-hand side applications with all of the LDD information required being submitted online. So we've been working at length with submission providers, including the planning portal, who've defined a new schema with us and demonstrated technically the information can travel from the applicant submitting information through whatever system they're using. In the middle, back office systems to hold the data and enable it to be updated. And this has been quite an exciting opportunity to work with all of the back office system providers, some of whom are in the room, and we've been really pleasantly surprised as to how much we've been able to engage. And then finally, on the left-hand side, it's data being compiled in the LDD itself. We need a better name for it, but in short, we've been working with a company called Atkins to build a new database that can just consume the information. We have recognised that there's a number of real technical challenges to this, including the fact that we've had to acknowledge that some systems aren't going to be ready as fast as others, and it's still a bit of a journey for them. So we've found a technical workaround that will enable us to go back to the original submission system and grab the data once we know a planning application exists. There's lots of really interesting challenges that we're learning about still around paper submissions, and we really will be pushing to try and get more data going forwards. Just very quickly touching on it, we're at the point where we have a data standard that we're working to. We're working with all the suppliers to make sure that the same technical abilities exist. And we're in the production of an alpha solution at the moment. We're building it, in short. Just so we're clear, and this is the message that, of course, Molly and I are always very, very keen to push across, is from our point of view, what we're building at the moment is a starting point. It will not be perfect. It's the start of a long journey for us. I'm sorry this is a bit of a hair-raising tour of the projects we're running going here. The second big project is now live, so I'm really pleased to say we have, well done Etienne, Erin and Stephen, for getting a single live data map for London. This is very similar to the Greater Manchester map, but it's got a bit of a London edge in that we've managed to procure and pull together 16 layers of data, which if you follow this URL, and I will share it after the event, big things that big vision it has is, firstly, it's a single point of data for London. So we're looking at how we can then try to find ways to update it without intervention. So find ways that we can plug into your data sources, whether you've got a corporate GIS system or whether you want to use our GIS system as your corporate GIS system. Secondly, we want it to be light touch. We don't want there to be any big, heavy overhead here. And every system that we've explored in this area has kind of windows for updating and really kind of expensive exercises. Thirdly, it's accessible to London, and I'd really hoped this link was going to work, but I will show anybody that wants to have a look at it on a laptop downstairs in a minute. And then finally, it has an API on the back. And this is the most important bit, is that we are essentially removing the need for suppliers to go and make FOI requests to each of you to ask for your data. And in practice, once we've managed to control this problem of how do we get the data from London boroughs to us, it will mean that they have a live stream of updated data all the time that they will just plug into. The APIs are live now, aren't they, Itin? Yep. So the APIs are live, so people can actually start to plug into that, and we're really keen to see what change this will make. That's actually just explaining what I've just explained. The where next. So we've gone live with 16 layers to start with, to see what happens, to see how we change this sector. We are where we had set up, but we will be resetting up a workshop to define what other data local planning authorities hold and what data we can actually get on a pan-London basis and how that might be useful to people.
Next project on the quick tour that we're giving you is the London Infrastructure Mapping Application. So this is a tool that was first developed in 2015, and it's gone through 3 stages of development since then, and it has 2 main purposes. One of them is to help infrastructure providers understand where they can coordinate and do joint street works. And the second purpose of the map is to help those same infrastructure providers plan for growth. So understand where development is likely to occur so that they can update their networks accordingly and not be a blocker to development. So we have tons of data in the infrastructure mapping application. Some of it is publicly accessible via the internet, obviously, and some of it is behind a login. And that sensitive data is mostly around future investment plans from infrastructure providers. The reason that's private is because they're quite sensitive and often schemes that aren't set in stone yet, but that are still being developed, but that could allow for a joint streetworks opportunity if those other infrastructure providers can plan accordingly. So we have data in the map from all those infrastructure providers you see up there, from the Mayor of London, from TfL, from lots of others, and also development data showing currently the existing LDD data and some supplementary data, but starting in March when our LDD automation occurs, it will be full of LDD data that's updated and a live feed, as we've talked about already. Another thing to mention is that this is an externally funded project like many of ours. We should have mentioned up front that the LDD project is funded through MHCLG's Local Digital Fund in part. This project is funded through the Lane Rental Surplus Fund, important to say. So the key new development in the IMA is something called the collaboration tool. And this was built with consultants from ARUP and with our GIS team here at the GLA. And what it does is allow infrastructure providers to see where their future investment plans overlap in space and time with other providers' plans so that they can talk to one another and dig up the road, ideally at the same time. Often that means switching a year or two, moving things around a little bit so that those plans can align. And that really helps reduce road congestion in London if we can get them to make those changes. And they need this data in order to do that. Next steps include focusing, so that was a focus on the collaboration tool. We're going to be focusing between now and November on the planning for growth element that we were talking about. And what we're looking to do is create a model that predicts the likelihood of particular planning applications coming forward as development. So for an infrastructure provider, it doesn't really matter to them if they see that a planning application has been submitted to the Borough of Southwark. That doesn't mean anything to them. They want to know, is that planning application going to become a development that needs a gas connection? So we are trying to, with the GLA and with some external support, develop a model that will tell you the likelihood of any particular application coming forward. So stay tuned for that, and also for additional improvements that are coming in November, and we'll be doing development after that as well. So that's the IMA. Next, 3D London.
So we are near the end, honest. The next project is probably a slightly bigger project for the GLA, which is defining a 3D model for London and trying to understand the best place for it. We recognise that some of the problem statements around this include that residents struggle to understand planning, and that was where we started off. It was a very planning-driven project. planners need to understand more of the cumulative visual impact and perhaps more importantly, a single version of the truth about what's being built. But as we started to explore this, we recognised that there was lots of benefits to other sectors, sectors that we really hadn't touched on or explored at all, including missed opportunities for planning automation, including other kind of wider pieces around planning automation, housing delivery challenge, and more importantly, a lot of commercial opportunities that the lack of an open source model created. We put out a call for information a while back to try and understand what all of the rest of the industry was doing in this sector, to understand whether actually the problems had already been addressed. A market overview demonstrating, this is just very quickly touched on, that there are all sorts of purposes for 3D information, some of which have a commercial benefit, some of which have a social benefit, and probably more importantly, they're all operating very separately. And what the opportunity really existed was to build on this to create a single market that will actually grow the wider market in the 3D sector rather than blow anybody out of the water. So we've started to explore much more of the user case behind it, and we've got some quite core principles that we're going to be taking forwards now for a procurement. The GLA has chosen to fund this project itself because it's recognised that it was one of the Mayor's objectives was to deliver this for London, but more important, to understand where it fitted against commercial solutions, because at the end of the day, we really are keen that the 3D solution for London actually grows the commercial offering rather than closes it down. So our time frame, rather than going into the academia behind it, we've spent a lot of time doing user case development. We are in the process of preparing our tender documents at the moment with a procurement very shortly. The procurement will be in the form of competition and will be quite an interesting thing to watch. Timetables-wise, we are hoping to get our procurement out before Christmas with a view to a very speedy interim solution afterwards.
All right. Last project is London's Underground Asset Register. And this is a project that we just began recently. It's a pilot, and we're doing it in collaboration with the Cabinet Office and the Cabinet Office's Geospatial Commission specifically, who are funding the pilot. And the purpose of the pilot is to map what is underground, literally, bring together data from infrastructure providers and local authorities to indicate wherever you're standing, the pipes underneath you, so that if an infrastructure provider needs to dig up the road, they don't hit one another's assets or their own assets, which happens more frequently than you would care to know. This all began because there was a project that was led by Thames Water in London doing a similar thing, but at a much, much smaller scale, called Hades. Good name, good pun, underground. And the Hades project was successful, but there wasn't a clear sponsor to take this forward and to create a service for London. Thames Water wasn't going to be the ones to map what was underground across London, even with the support of other utilities. Then, because the Mayor's Infrastructure High-Level Group, which is a collection of all the CEOs of all the infrastructure providers in London, were really keen to share data to create this service, the GLA got involved to lead that charge. And with funding from the Geospatial Commission, we're now one of 2 pilots nationally testing out what it would take to eventually build a national underground asset register. That's government's ambition if this pilot stage goes well. As I just explained, this is the structure. I won't get into the detail, but it's a £3.9 million project across 2 pilots. We are one of them. There will be a regional MVP possibly if the local ones go well, and then a national rollout. And the point of this is to learn. The point of this isn't to create a service today. The point of it is to figure out what the problems and the successes could be if we did go forward with this. I'm not going to delve too deeply, but the main point of this project is to avoid hitting one another's cables and pipes, which is around strike avoidance, and to increase efficiencies on site so that folks aren't digging tiny holes trying to figure out what might be in a certain place 25 times before they actually start digging, but can in fact trust the data and begin much more quickly, which reduces road network congestion if you're closing the road for less time. It's important to say that this is a project around data, obviously, which means our main role at the GLA is to bring together all of those existing data sets, transform them into a form that can enter a digital platform, and then stick them into that platform. And Ordnance Survey are the folks building the actual tool itself for both London and the Northeast, which is the other pilot. This tool is not necessarily the tool that will go forward nationally, it's just the tool for the pilot areas. We're covering 6 boroughs in London. Let's see if I get them all in one go. Southwark, Camden, Croydon, City of London, Newham, and Tower Hamlets. Did it. So those are the areas that will be mapped as part of this pilot. We couldn't do all of London because the delivery date for this is March of this year, and we started in May. So you can imagine the speed at which we are moving. And we are partnering with 22 infrastructure providers in London and local authorities. So that's 22 partners total. All the water providers, gas providers, electricity providers, the various local authorities, telcos, and others in addition to that. So it's quite a big group who are willing to share their data with one another. For the purpose of the pilot, this will be a closed environment because there's big national security risks if you open it to the whole world at this stage. But for the purpose of the pilot, it will be those folks who get to see the data as well as contribute it. The project timeline, as I said, ends in March. Our big focus in London is around the data sharing agreements that we need to put in place to make this work, around sourcing the data, bringing it together, transformation, and the data model that supports all of this. So basically, the schema that allows us to push our data and the Northeast data together into a platform that will make sense for both data sets. That's a very quick explanation of what we're doing, but I'm happy to answer questions at the end.
Okay, sorry, that was possibly the fastest presentation we've ever done on subjects that we could actually probably do a PhD on each of them. So, well done, Molly.